sorry, I didn't. Okay, so we will just. Sorry. Yeah. We will just pause until the councillors come into the room.
Yeah, I was thinking that, bro. I was seriously thinking that. Damn, I need a ticket to it. Insurance. Yes.
Councillor Cooper, is Penny with you?
On her way,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Good speech, though, Daniel.
Thank you. Maybe for many people.
It didn't move me enough to. Yeah.
Well, if you're here.
It's actually a very brave move to abstain. It's easy to
Welcome
say
back,
yes.
Councillor
Easy to
Cooper
say
and
no.
Councillor Hulse. We are now moving to D. So we are starting with questions, and I'm hoping I don't have to use the bell anymore today at all, because even during the debate, surely we can't have a 5-minute speech on a housing infrastructure targeted rate, but we'll look forward. So, any questions, please, of the officials? Oh, right, we are going straight to...
I just have one question.
I think just for the public record, Mr. Chair, perhaps we could just have a summation about if this goes through today, the idea is that it suddenly gives the ability for us to explore more deeply the mechanisms of how this would actually work, and then it would have to come back again, is my understanding, to be voted on in terms of the mechanism. So perhaps if we could just get that clarified.
Yep, we'll just clarify that for the public. Yes.
Thank you. Through the Chair, the Council is quite right. What you're specifically voting on is an amendment to our policy to enable us to use targeted rates to fund specifically water and wastewater infrastructure, which will mean that we can use that tool alongside water cares, infrastructure growth charges, development contributions and the like, just to give us a greater suite of instruments.
And then coming back...
And and what you're not doing here is approving any particular charge or rate. It simply gives the organisation the ability now to consider all of those opportunities where we might be able to benefit from using a targeted rate, in which case it would come forward here and you would debate and agree or otherwise.
Thank you. Councillor Walker, Wayne Walker.
Sure. Is our intention in moving this to also capture value uplift, which is more akin to a tax on the capital increase in the value of property that benefits from infrastructure improvements?
Not at this stage, but watch this space at the LTP. Councillor Lee.
I'm a little bit puzzled here, Mr. Chairman. We're about to recommend a formal measure to legalise targeted rates to fund growth infrastructure, which I fully support. But we're already voted on a targeted rate, which the Mayor keeps saying is to pay for the impacts of 18 million visitors through the airport for infrastructure. So isn't the cart a wee bit before the horse? Shouldn't we have worked this out first and then started levying rates for infrastructure? The process seems to be very strange to me.
Through the Chair, in your consultation materials on the accommodation provider targeted rate, I think you were pretty clear. You talked about the way in which that activity at ATEED currently is fully funded through the general rate, and you proposed that changed somewhat, which is what you've just agreed.
Yes.
And you were very explicit that what you were proposing is that the general rate funding that is freed up be redirected to support infrastructure investment.
So
That was what you
it
proposed.
is actually a targeted rate which will benefit infrastructure, allegedly. And you've done it without... It's not quite legal yet, is it?
Right, there are no more questions. Debate. No debate. I'll ask the Mayor, do you actually want to have a right of reply on this particular subject or not?
No, I'll waive that right, Mr Chair, given the time of the day.
Right, is this requiring division, folks? Okay, so I'm going to put it, it's been moved by Mayor Goff, it's been seconded by myself. You can read it on the screen, it's in your papers. I won't read it out for you, so I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you. Right, we're rattling along to item B. And
Mr Chair, can we record that as unanimous then? I didn't hear any dissent.
yes, we will record that as unanimous, yes. Thank you. Okay, right, well, we are aware that there are members of the public here still and appreciate them showing interest in this topic, and I'm sorry that many of your colleagues couldn't stay because no doubt they have jobs to go to, etc., and other commitments. So, where we go, we just start with Matthew and Stephen.
Certainly. So the proposal here is that Council implements a living wage policy over the Council term through to October 19. So if the policy is adopted, then our recommendation is that the rate will initially be based on the reference living wage published by Living Wage Aotearoa as at the 1st of July this year, that being $20.20. So we're proposing that the year one minimum rate, which would come into effect on the 1st of September this year, be $18 with a targeted rate of $21 by September 19. That rate being calculated by using council inflators, and that is intended to ensure that the rates are affordable. The living wage proposal extends to the CCOs, but excludes contractors and volunteers. The phased implementation that is proposed is intended to enable time for the business to evolve business models to enable the productivity improvements to take effect. We do propose a complementary trainee rate, which is calculated as being 80% of the living wage rate, and that apply to trainees and cadets. And we also propose that if this policy is adopted, then at the start of the implementation, we develop a set of indicators which we will baseline ahead of this September's payments to be able to track the impact of the living wage implementation.
Thank you, Stephen. Councillor Casey, this is questions, obviously.
No questions.
No questions. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. I've got a question, and it's around A, because I thought we were doing the annual plan. How do we therefore commit to something that's going to happen for 3 years if we're only talking about 1 year? Can you explain that, please?
I might take that, Mr Chairman. I think it's a fair question. So you're signalling here what you want to do over a 3-year period, and we're being explicit about what it actually means for this coming budget. I imagine, if you vote this through today, the management response will be to position it as if it's going to get followed up in the subsequent 2 years. But we would indeed be, through our normal budget process, you'll retain rights to watch those numbers. You would retain rights to have another look at it in the following year. So that's just the natural governance process. I mean, there are other examples where you've done similar things. You've set a multi-year intention. That doesn't of itself mean that you've got a multi-year hard commitment. Okay. The annual plan process effectively enables you to reconsider, have a look, and re-vote it if you want.
Second question, and that's related to BI. So the living wage movement, which I think was started by the church, the unions and sort of community groups, my understanding is that the rate that they reference is set every January, right? And then it's adopted in July. We're not actually you're not suggesting, or sorry, your worship's not suggesting that we do that. What you're suggesting in this is that we look at the living wage movement rate of 2020, but not again. We're looking, the increase will be only council projected inflation. Is that correct?
I'll answer that, given I did chair the subcommittee. So we formed the first subcommittee, met late last year when the living wage target was 2020. It has subsequently moved to 21, but we are basing it on 2020, and that's what we are aiming for over 3 years. And partly to answer your first question, which is we will then vote on it again and consider it again at the LTP. We will then vote on it and consider it again at the following annual plan. So this is a 3-year process. This is merely a target. The living wage has now moved, or living wage set by Living Wage Movement Aotearoa is $21, but we've indicated we are not going to be stuck with, having to endorse and aim for a wage that has been dictated by an NGO. So we've made that quite clear. So we're saying 2020 over the next 2 years because of September, and then at that time, and it'll be a new council, it will be considered again by staff to come back with a recommendation if we are to then amend our policy once again. So that's 3 years away.
Okay, my next question, if I may continue. The complementary trainee, cadet, intern and apprenticeship rate, when do you expect to set that?
Through the Chair. So we are recommending in this proposal that be set at a minimum of 80% of the living wage rate that is adopted each year.
So the first time you're going to set it is going to be
$16.16.
This year.
Yeah,
Okay.
1st of September this year.
Yeah, it doesn't actually say that in the report, so maybe it does. Sorry if I missed it.
It does in Appendix C.
Oh, sorry, apologies. Okay, and my last question is, if and I know that other councillors will talk on whether we should be looking at staffing at all, but how come we're looking at those who it's recommended need some help at the bottom end? How come we're not looking at those at the top end who potentially might get too much?
Again, that was a part of the advisory group. Again, we set that as a key thing, that we wanted to start at the very bottom and help those that needed the most assistance to bring them up. So the aim was, and this was actually a following on from the work being done by the Chief Executive over the last 3 years by lifting the rates of the lower paid people at the council as compared to the higher or the highest paid, if you know what I mean. So that's been occurring. We just endorsed that, and we also wanted to have it that we wouldn't be dealing with any relativity problems or very few relativity compression issues in the first year. So we're calculating that maybe 10% of that 1.9, and that would be maximum, would be related to compression and preserving relativities for just that next level up, who are getting at the moment $18, would need to therefore, for example, be $19. So this is 90 to 95% on lifting the lowest. And then the next year, just so that we're quite clear, the recommendation will be to keep trying to work on those that are $18 to $19. Just picking a figure, could be a little bit more, but we're again working on lifting that lower group again, which will be a slightly bigger group because it'll be people with $18 and $19. And again, we're estimating relativity issues might be about 20% of the budget at that time. In the following year, it would be, the relativity would be a bigger chunk, 30% or whatever. So.
I'll just ask one more, and I know other people have got questions. So, Councillor Filipaina mentioned the concern that RFA had around their inability, I should say, to employ staff now as a result of the potential cut to their funding. Does that mean that this implementation, are there no, I mean, is that around the living wage?
Yep.
Problem?
No, there was the cuts that, sorry. Just RFA gave it to us at Finance and Performance and indicated that they've stopped
because
hiring.
Because they're $1 million short of their budget.
Because, because of the pressure that they are under as a result of the pressure we apply to all our CCOs and units around saving. So they've now had to stop employing people, and just as a result gets put on to the people that are there. And that was through their PowerPoint presentation.
And can I ask just one more? Sorry, did did this ever go to the CCO boards for their comments?
Some of them did.
Because some of them employ
Let's get Sue
staff
to
on the living
answer
wage.
that. It certainly has gone to the management, but Sue will.
If I may, through the Chair, the CCO boards have all been made aware of it. The communication was from the staff at both Stephen's level and at my level to our peers, so CE to CE, CFO to CFO, and in that way the CCOs have managed what communication they have felt appropriate and wanted to have with their boards.
Thank you. I'll hold my comments for later. Thank you.
Councillor Sayers.
Thank you, Mr Chair. My question is just around perhaps elaborating around how it's not being extended to the volunteers and the contractors, just getting some clarification there, because I just have a concern that potentially it could end up that occurring. So it's just to get a little bit of confidence around it. So I've got two questions, Mr Chair, both are interrelated. The first one is there any wording in our procurement contracts that you're aware of that the living wage might be encouraged to be paid to contractors in the future? So is that? Just if I could get that answer. And the second one is there any evidence from other organisations that have adopted the living wage policy that the living wage has crept into their contracting suppliers, if you know? Thank you, Mr Chair.
Through the Chair, so no, there are currently no provisions within our procurement documents relating to any expectation around living wage, and certainly all the discussions through the last 5 or 6 months have been that contractors would be excluded for the duration of this council term. The second question, we've certainly in talking with other organisations, we've not seen it creep into the contractor space, but there has been, in some cases, a considered decision to look at extending it.
Okay, do you know if they actually went ahead with that? That's probably what I'm interested in. Are they still considering that?
The ones we've talked with certainly still considering it.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Lee,
Thank you, Mr Chair. So by basing our 2020 on living wage movement Aotearoa New Zealand, and you've just confirmed that they're now lodging at $21. So we're not hitting their target at the moment by what we're doing, and I assume that we definitely won't be hitting that come the remainder or the end of this term. Can I just ask the question around, are we signing on in any sort of signatory fashion to this particular NGO? Is that term a living wage employer relevant to us? Will they be putting? Have you had discussions with them that we will then be some sort of signatory on their books? Just confirmation around the agreement or the partnership that the subcommittee came up with, and whether, I mean, clearly we're not hitting their targets now or in the future. So what does that mean for us in terms of some sort of signatory capacity? And if we're not, then why are we using the term? Should we not be carrying on with social equity principle, which is what we've been doing already?
Through the Chair, at this stage we are not seeking to become an accredited employer under Living Wage Aotearoa. There are a number of conditions to becoming an accredited employer which we're not recommending at this stage, notably committing to the automatic increases that Living Wage Aotearoa publish each year, and secondly extending it to all council contractors. So it's not our intention to become an accredited employer.
Okay.
And I can confirm that Living Wage Aotearoa are under no illusion that that is the case. We are not going to be an accredited. We had an objective through the Merrill proposal to head towards a target of 2020, which it was at that time, and we've honoured that, or if we vote this through, we're honouring that, and of course we'll reconsider next year and the year after. But no, we've made it quite clear. So how they are going to, if this passes, how they are going to promote us as being a follower, I don't know, but we will not be going down on their website as an accredited member who fulfills all the obligations of. Now, I've lost my counter here. There were no more questions. Right. Councillor.
Sorry, no. Are you taking comments?
Yes, we are. Yep.
Okay.
You're first.
Very quick. I just want to say once again, good on the Mayor for leading out on this. This is long overdue and has even more support from the people of Auckland than the last one, running at 71%, and I am quoting the feedback in this time. And I think those people out there in our communities, right across our communities, I might add, there doesn't seem to be any distinction here at all where you live, recognise the need of fellow Aucklanders, and that's very aptly summed up in the three main comments that Auckland people have made across the board, and that was this fair and just wage is necessary to match the high cost of living here in Auckland, and boy, isn't that the case now more so than ever. People need to be able to live with dignity, have the ability to buy necessities and provide for their family. That had another massive repetition right across Auckland, and respect of the council, and I guess through the Mayor's leadership, good to see Auckland Council being a leader with hope that others will follow us. So I think those comments made by our Aucklanders sum it up. So congratulations to the Mayor, and thank you for the people that have worked long and hard for this over many years. Well done.
Councillor Casey.
First of all, I'd like to make a personal disclosure. I earn as a councillor $104,000 according to the Deputy Mayor here. The people around this table earn a lot of money. We all earn over $100,000. I'd just like to make that clear at the outset. Because in our organisation, if you turn to page 54, you'll see that 2,064 earn less than the living wage. And that's what we're about to change today. And it's been a long, long time coming. Who are the people who are earning the pitiful wages? They're in recreation, they're in the libraries, they're usually brown-skinned, and they're usually women. So this is a great thing you're doing today. So see the councillors, Dick Quacks and member Tohenari, when you talked about jobs, This is the best thing you can do today, is vote the living wage for council staff to raise their level from where it is at the moment. And let me tell you what that's like. When we leave here, if we ever leave here, at 5:30 p.m. today, a woman will walk through this door as she has been walking through this door for very many years. She has been before us. She will clean our mess. She will clean our toilets. She will work from 5:30 until 3:30 a.m. She and her husband have kids. She doesn't get to see her kids, because she's here cleaning up our mess. Guess what she gets paid? $15.60 an hour. You'll see her coming in the door. Correct? Living wage people?
The minimum wage $15.75.
For her to change from $15.60 an hour to $19.90, or even to the new rate, is a 33% increase. This is huge for the people at the bottom. That's why I said the $100,000, we forget the struggle that people have. We forget we live in a different world a lot of the time. And this is a great, great thing that this council is doing. And for whoever across there talked about creeping into contracts, no, it won't creep, Greg. It will stampede in, because that's the next stage. It might not be this 3 years, but you watch. The next mayor, if it's this mayor, the next stage is contracts, because she is on a contract. Right? And I think that's true. I don't think that even this great decision we're making today will affect her. So for another 3 years, she'll still come into this town hall and clean up our mess for $15.60 an hour. So not creep, stampede. Thank you.
Is there any text? Oh, sorry, Councillor Lee. Denise, yes?
Thanks. I just want to reiterate a point I made earlier about our social equity scheme and acknowledge the reasons for the benefits of discussing what we're discussing here today for those in our lowest brackets. But the point I want to raise is that we were doing it, but we're doing it already on our own terms. And terms that were there for a specific reason, a considered and timely and sequential reason, so that we didn't have to find $7 million new capital over the remainder of this term. So it's not that we're not for raising and lifting those lower bands, it's the timing of it, so that we don't have the pressure that we will now have, because we're signing on to $7 million of new capital, or new funds, sorry, over this term. So, agree totally with the way in which the equity principle helps meet costs of living, has an impact on diversity and gender equity and attrition rates, all of those. It's just not in dispute. But we, was it 2 years ago now, decided to address this. We made a specific decision to address this ourselves. So now what we have been asked to do is fast forward everything in response to a campaign. And I really do think in terms of fiscal responsibility, we're having to make a specific call here. We were doing it, but now we've been asked to fast forward it and not in our own terms. My only other point that I'll make is that I think we should absolutely leave wage setting discussions to the Crown. They already provide specifically targeted support. We know that the living wage movements, their settings come up from a targeting based on 2 adults and 2 children, and often the beneficiaries of the living wage, the biggest beneficiaries are young people with no kids, who are often doing part-time work or casual work as students. They're just starting out, so they stand to gain quite a bit. So look, I would just say in closing that if it's best left at in a nationwide wage setting forum, that's exactly where it should be best left. And for those who want to specifically raise the employees that are connected here to Auckland Council, we were addressing that.
Councillor Newman.
Mr Chair, this year's draft annual plan proposes a living wage to be introduced over a 3-year period, and I support that policy. It can be funded through the savings that we achieve. It also, I think, acknowledges the very important need to achieve gender pay equity, and that complements the decision of the government to settle the Terra Nova pay equity claim on behalf of Christine Bartlett and others, and I think that Ms Bartlett is a great New Zealander, and I think that she deserves all the acknowledgement that she receives. So I'm prepared to vote for a policy that delivers the so-called living wage, but I just make this point, Mr Chair, at the same time as we make a political decision to adopt a wage floor, we should also, I think, ponder the plight of our librarians, the men and women who have been told to reapply for their jobs.
Yeah.
Those people, those good people, are experiencing an uncertain future whereby they face a lack of job certainty, but there is an absolute reality that there will be a change in workplace conditions. So today we back the living wage, and that's a good thing, but I do reflect on the irony of that with some of my perhaps more left-wing friends who march into the realm of a workplace relations leading to a wage floor, yet capriciously don't appear to have that much interest in participation and debate around workplace conditions for our librarians, some of the most benign people in the world, Mr Chair.
That's so unfair. That's so unfair.
So,
even they're the other day
it's a debate, Kathy. You've got my vote.
Casey.
Chairman.
Councillor Casey.
I want to conclude by acknowledging Fala,
So unfair.
and I want to acknowledge Annie and Sister Anne and Sister Margaret and Deacon Senili from my parish at St Anne's, and others who have asked for this policy change, and I want to thank my colleagues for their support for this policy, because some of the primary beneficiaries of it will be my constituents.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. We have Councillor Sayers and then Councillor Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Probably more of just a point or an observation or something for us all to reflect on in perhaps a slightly bigger picture. I'd just like to mention the fact that probably no matter how much Auckland Council increases the wages, to own a home in Auckland is going to become more and more difficult all the time for more and more of council employees, perhaps not just the group we're talking about today. So it's not just the minimum wage of our employees, or more and more council employees. We're also talking about Aucklanders, residents and ratepayers right across Auckland and their ability to own a home. The biggest expense obviously being rent or servicing a mortgage for many households. And this is my point of perhaps reflection, is that council is largely responsible for the high cost of housing, I suggest by choking off land supply. Aucklanders' way of life has always included owning your own home. It's our way of life and the financial security that comes with that. So I just want to make that observation that perhaps as a council body we need to be focusing on our planning policies and our release of land in the bigger picture. So thank you, Mr Chair.
Cooper.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I want to just reflect on what the Mayor said at the beginning of at the opening of this meeting about having
to speak up on behalf of the wider community instead of well-organised lobby groups or narrow interest groups. And I know that he meant that in a different way, but there's an equal pressure in this regard as well. And I think that should be acknowledged. When I was elected, I'm elected as a regional councillor to weigh up the wider benefits for the whole region rather than a smaller group of people. And I know, and I'm going to get, and I do apologise for my back to the community, but I get sat here. I hate sitting here. I think it's rather rude having to sit like this to the public, and I will get jeered at, I know that. But the Mayor also said it's about courage. And so, you know, I just have to suck that sort of behaviour up. And I'll get it from other councillors as well. When you're looking at it, you know, I've got to balance up the needs of 1.5 million people, not just a small group. And those people are ratepayers, but they're also renters who bear the brunt of our rates as well, because part of that belongs to that. I'm really proud that after the last vote we had on this, I went, as soon as our new CEO was installed, I asked to come and visit him within a couple of days of him taking his seat in his new office, and said, look, we didn't pass the living wage. We're not actually doing that here, actually. That's pretty disingenuous. It's not the living wage. I said, we've got to do something about raising those lower bands. And he came back to us with his plan to raise those lower bands of staff, which is the right thing to do. But it was on our terms. It wasn't linked to an outside organisation. And it also wasn't linked to the vagaries of who the hell gets voted in or not. Because I believe we should not be involved. Politicians should not be involved in setting people's wages. We don't do it for... The only person that we do it for is our CEO. And we get whacked for that as well. But this is actually pretty tough, because we're saying in this report, oh, well, we'll do this, and then you get another vote, and depending who's on, you get that. Where's the certainty there? I'm really proud of what we've done. It means that it's managed by the CEO and his staff. It's consistent, it's fair. Our lower band staff over the last 3 years since we implemented this have had a 13% wage increase. Our top level have sacrificed, our top level, who we always hear vilified for being experienced and qualified and actually backing us up, they've had about a 3% to 4% in 3 years. And we've lost a lot of people because of that. Good people going away to get better salaries from other places because we're under a punitive regime from the last legislation. So, for me, you know, I think a better way of doing this would have been carry on what we were doing, but also ask our CCOs to take it on, because we weren't doing it there. And that would have helped our CCOs manage, you know, those cuts that they've got to take. Because it's all very well saying, oh no, they're only, you know, RFA are only stopping employing people because of the extra $1 million we asked them, on top of the other savings. Well, actually, you cannot pretend that another $300,000 in just this financial year for them is not going to impact. So that is pretty disingenuous as well. Of course it impacts them. So I didn't interrupt you, Councillor Casey. So I actually think that we could have carry on what we're doing now. It would not have been affected by who's in and who's out in politics. It would have been a really good way to keep going, and also ask the CCOs to do that as well and work that through that way. I think that would have been a really good way, and it would have been actually safer and fairer for our staff. The other... 6 hours. And so... in the end, I believe that this is a management issue, not a governance issue. And for that reason, I'll vote against it, not because I don't care about our people, because I made sure we got that social equity principle in the first place. Thank you.
Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, just once again, I'd just like to thank the community on this issue. I think it's really good. It's we do have to make decisions as politicians. I know this is a policy decision. We do not intervene into operational, but this is a policy that overlaps our operational direction for staff. So I support this for the fact that Auckland is an expensive place to live. We can't control everyone's wages, no, but we can make a statement. We can say what we think the people are worth who are doing the work in our corridors, in our community centres, in our libraries, on the streets and the parks, doing a lot of hard work for their families, but also for Auckland. So I think, for me, it's, I personally do not have children, but I don't think I could live on $15.75 a week, less than $500 a week after tax, and you add student loans and everything else to that. So I think it's about us making a statement about people living in Auckland and the people that we do have an effect over, and that's the staff who are directly employed by Auckland Council and our CCOs. I also want to say 19 of our 21 local boards supported this policy. We had some of the largest numbers of submissions ever, and it's lobbying or whatever. I think it's important to listen to that. It's a constant that's come up before. Kaipatiki local board that I was on for 2 terms, we also passed, a direction setter on the living wage on the North Shore for council. So I know it's not perfect, but I think it's about, making a statement. It's about making sure that our staff are looked after and are actually paid for the work they do, the very hard work that they do. And hopefully this sends a message to other organisations to pay their staff well as well. My father owns a small business, and I know that half the time and throughout when I was a kid, it was always him taking the pay cut to make sure his staff were looked after. And those staff that were treated well and paid well stayed. They worked harder because they felt they were worth it, and they didn't take sick days because they felt like going to work was meaningful and they were contributing, and they felt respected by my dad just as well as what we can do right now as a council. So I'm absolutely supportive of everyone around this table and respect your decision today. But for me, I think this is important for the people who work for us and for Auckland. And it's also, something, thank you, Mayor Goff, for pushing hard through the campaign, and you were voted in with a large majority. So, I'm happy to hear everyone's views and respect them, but for me, this is really important, and important to the people out there doing the hard work on behalf of us. So, thank you.
That's
Mayor Goff. Oh, sorry.
I'm in reply, so maybe Councillor Lee could go before me.
Councillor Lee.
Okay. Thank you. I support the Mayor's proposal here, and I congratulate the Mayor for persisting with this. I also congratulate Living Wage Aotearoa and the campaigners who have been campaigning for this for many years. It's unconscionable that this council should be paying people less than the living wage when you think about it. And a lot of those staff are carrying out extremely important roles in the library, in the leisure centres. They're the people that are the face of the council, if you like, and probably the most valued part of the council. It's interesting that people who begrudge the living wage to the lower paid seem to fall over themselves to give pay rises to the higher paid. But I don't want to strike a negative note. I support this, and congratulations to all those people who have been involved in this campaign. We know that inequality is the source of, obviously, poverty, but also ill health, mental health, and interestingly enough, low productivity. So this is a step in the right direction, but it's only a beginning. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Right, well, we do have someone else who's popped in there, and that's Councillor Simpson.
Thank you. Very quickly, I personally don't support the living wage. I think it's badly targeted. It's not just for Auckland. It's actually, if you support the living wage, it is the same rate in Invercargill as it is in Auckland. It's calculated on the basis of a 2-adult, 2-child family, and I'm not sure how many 2-adult, 2-child families Auckland actually has. I'm also worried about the savings. It says I've asked for this to come from within the staff budget, and I've been told, and I've tried to get an amendment and that didn't work around this. You know, we've saved 1.8 million in libraries, and I would hate this to come from another core council service. I think it's a management issue. I don't think it's a governance issue. The government itself has already recently provided targeted support for low-income families through the likes of Working for Families and the Accommodation Supplement. Been lifted, the minimum wage has been lifted from $15.25 to $15.75, which is a 3.3% increase. And this year's increase will put extra money in the pockets of almost 120,000 workers and lift wages throughout the economy by $65 million a year without significantly hindering job growth or imposing undue pressure on businesses. However, I do listen to my community, and 61% of our submitters in the Oeki ward agreed that we should pay the living wage to our employers. What bothers me is actually we are, but we're not. We're only doing it for 1 year, but we're going to do it differently from then on, according to these papers. So to that end, I think the best I can do is abstain, because I don't believe that we are adopting the living wage in its entirety, and I think that's as good as I can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Right, we have Councillor Fletcher and then Mayor Goff.
Thank you. I want to give credit to Mayor Goff for actually taking this forward. For many, many years, I've been somebody who has actually been on the sidelines in terms of advocacy for women's organisations, but you cannot ignore the plight for so many families as Auckland becomes more and more expensive. So, as a practising Christian, I could not vote against this in conscience today. I appreciate that it is the responsibility of the CEO and that this is a management issue, but I also support those who say, well, you know, this is an opportunity for us to put a stamp in terms of policy, and I really want to applaud all of those who have campaigned for a very long period of time. I'd like particularly to acknowledge Monica Briggs and the YWCA and others who have worked tirelessly, and I give this my full support and congratulate the Mayor on actually advancing this.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair, and can I thank councillors for the expression of their views, I think all of which were done with sincerity. There's a serenity prayer that goes something like this: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. We can't give everybody a decent wage and a decent living standard in Auckland, but we can take responsibility for those people who we employ and look to their interests. And I think that what this is about more than anything, and why I've put it in the very first budget that I've been involved with, is that the living wage encompasses the values that I think are intrinsic to being a Kiwi and to being an Aucklander. And more than anything, that is about decency, it's about fairness, it's about an inclusive society. To me, it's a very simple argument. A person that does an honest week's work deserves a wage that they and their families can live on at a decent standard. That's what it's about for me. And this is an expensive city, we all know that, and that's why the living wage is even more important in this context. Mr Chairman, the second argument is I think it's about being a good employer and motivating our workforce. You know, I remember when I was a kid growing up and working in different jobs, and if I felt that the person that I was working for actually genuinely had an interest in what I was doing and rewarded me for what I was doing and how hard I was trying, I tried even harder. We have a situation with our lowest paid workers where we've got an attrition rate of 25%. That's 1 in 4 people leaving each year. And why are they leaving? They're leaving if they can't get a wage that they can actually live on. I think the real benefit to council is that it will improve the motivation of the people we employ. It will improve the level of attrition. It will cut down the costs that we face in training and training and training as our workforce keeps churning on. And the people that we're talking about are the people who are working hard for our community in the parks, the recreation centres, the libraries and elsewhere. Now, I said the courage to change the things you can. We can make this change. Yes, it has a cost. It'll be 1.9 million in the first year. At the end of year 3, I think it'll be about 7 million. That is something that we can afford to do. We should be looking at efficiencies that will cover the cost of that, but most importantly, we should pass this recommendation because it is the right thing for us to do and for Auckland. Thank you.
Right, well, I'm going to call for a division. I was about to do that. Thank you, Councillor Casey. So we'll have a division on this, and again, I'm not going to read the 5 parts of E. It is on the screen, and you have it in your papers.
Read it in French, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Clough.
Yes.
We'd like an Terra.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Sorry? Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Aye.
Councillor Collins.
For.
Councillor Cooper.
No.
Councillor Darby.
For.
Councillor Filipaina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Mayor Goff.
Aye.
Member Henare.
Yep.
Councillor Hills.
Yes, please.
Councillor Hulse.
Aye.
Member Karkay.
Aye.
Councillor Denise Lee.
Against.
Councillor Mike Lee.
Aye.
Councillor Newman.
For.
Councillor Quacks.
Against.
Councillor Sayers. Councillor Simpson.
Again, abstain.
Councillor Sir John Walker. For. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Aye.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
That has been carried 17-3 with 1 abstention. Thank you. Right, councillors, we will now move on to the group of...
Point of order, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to be helpful here.
Sorry.
We've been meeting for longer than 6 hours, and I'd like to move an extension of time.
Seconded by Councillor Newman. To extend, right? We'll put that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, right. We are now on to F, which is a group.
You missed the vote, Greg. Do you want to
Yeah, oh, yeah.
You purposely missed the vote.
It's too late. Yeah, okay, right. Matthew, now it might be the odd item there we were going to give a little bit more feedback on. Can you remember which ones?